Spence. I'll be your primary host from Bytes for the session. We've booked an hour for this, and we are going to record the session. So if any of your colleagues, if you find anything of interest and you wish your colleagues to watch this back, then you'll be sent the link after the session. But thanks again for taking the time. Well, we're going to be exploring all things modern workplace, focusing around the Microsoft 365 stack and the Surface as well. Before I get into the agenda, I thought I'd just give you a quick sort of 30 seconds on Bytes for those that don't know Bytes. We're a specialist IT software solutions and services business. We've been around since 1982, and we're pleased to say that this time last year, I think to the day, we floated on the FTSE. Current revenues, for those who are interested, are around about the 1.2 billion mark. We're Microsoft's largest software partner, but we have a number of other services that we bring to the market as well, specifically focused on three areas. One is the modern workplace. Another is around cybersecurity. We have a very large cybersecurity practice, and the last one is around hybrid infrastructure. So three key pillars where we try and steer customers through the best possible solutions that we've got to offer. So that's Bytes that don't know us. Thanks again for joining. So I'm going to spend just a very few 5-10 minutes tops, just talking a bit about the Microsoft Surface. For those that don't know it, it's not a hardware pitch. It's just explaining how the Microsoft Surface range is not just another hardware platform. Just to kind of set the scene there. And then I'm joined today by my colleagues Hannah and Eamon, who will introduce themselves in just a second, who will be really talking a bit more about some of the services that we can help you with to remotely manage some of your desktop environment. So like I said, my name's Darren. I've been with the business since 1997, and if I hand over to Hannah and Eamon to introduce themselves. Hannah?
Yeah, thanks Darren. Yes, so my name's Hannah. I'm from one of Bytes' partner organizations called Core. So we help Bytes with kind of Microsoft 365 deployments and power the Bytes managed workspace offering. I also have a joint role where I work as a modern workplace and security sales specialist for Bytes. So Eamon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Hannah. Morning all. So my name's Eamon. I'm the solutions director here at Core. And I get involved with kind of early planning, early architecting of the Microsoft 365 stack. So that really does range from many of the pillars that Darren alluded to. So from kind of the productivity collaboration side of what Microsoft brings to the world, right through to infrastructure and endpoint management, which is obviously one of the key focuses today. So looking forward to covering that in more detail shortly, and also great to see some familiar names popping up. So good to see you all.
Great stuff. Thanks, Eamon. So like I said, I'm going to spend just a few minutes just talking a bit about the Surface and how it fits in, but I thought I'd set the scene initially with some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace. I mean, you know, COVID, we don't need to be reminded of. It's created this kind of strange world in which we live. But I think what it's taught us is the ability or the need to be agile in everything that we do, the way that we provide equipment to end users, the way that we support the applications, the way we secure their environments, and how also IT teams themselves are having to adapt to some of the increased pressures that are being placed on IT teams, often with a limited budget and no additional resources. So we're seeing that all the time in all of our customers, and really, you know, hopefully what you'll see today in the next hour is just some of the solutions that we've got with Microsoft to make your running teams more efficient, but really, you know, making that customer experience, your end user customer experience, the very best it really can be, without labouring too much onto the IT department. So, you know, Microsoft have got a very good story around this Microsoft 365, which is all the software and the services that they provide with their Microsoft Surface range as well. They talk around this better together story, and certainly when you understand a bit more about what that actually means, it's not just marketing spin. When Microsoft developed the Surface, for example, they sat their hardware engineers alongside their software engineers. So when they're developing the next versions of Windows, now the platform that they've been testing all those different technologies on is the Microsoft Surface. So Surface is really built for Windows, and Windows runs best on Surface. And you know, there's some great use cases to really bring that to life. I just want to talk just briefly about the Surface. Like I said, it's not just another hardware pitch. There's lots of hardware vendors that we do sell, whether it's HP, Lenovo, Dell. There's a whole range. So we're not limited to the Surface. But you know, the Surface does actually have some slightly different aspects to it that perhaps the other hardware vendors don't. One is this closely the alignment with the Microsoft software and services stack, but also the way they design their technologies. They go a little bit further than the average hardware vendor and just make products adaptable. So most of their products have more than one use. So whether you're using those particular devices as a laptop or a tablet, most of them you can use some type of interactive pen, and some of their other really high-end studio range, which are these really meaty desktops, have some really quite flexible screens as well. So I'm going to touch on that just briefly as we go through. One of the things that that Microsoft do, I think, exceptionally well, they have a number of different teams that specialize in things that necessarily aren't just hardware related. So when they're building the Surface, they do have this human factors group, which sounds very fancy, but effectively the purpose of this is to make sure these devices have multiple uses and make sure that the hardware and the software is fully inclusive, to make it easy for everybody around the community to actually interact with the devices and get the most out of those. So the way that we work and the way that we learn and the way that we interact, all these teams or this particular team specialises on developing products that take all those things into consideration. And one thing that some people don't realise is that Microsoft only build for the corporate and commercial and public sector, so they don't specialise in any personal devices. And whilst you can pick these devices up in PC world, their market is very clear. It is the business, the end user, the professional user, and because of that, their devices themselves are loaded with operating systems of higher spec than those that you typically have at your home and your employees might actually use on a personal basis. Things that they have built into their Surface is I think called advanced exchange. So what this is that it doesn't matter which Surface you buy, if it breaks or needs to go back to base and get changed, they will dispatch a new device often before your old one is fixed. So it's one of the things that they bring to market to really ensure they're doing the best to support the professional worker. Bit of a marketing slide, but nonetheless quite an important one. The surveys that they've carried out certainly suggest that most people, a high 80%, are very happy with their devices. And I think one thing to touch on is around this whole idea around talent acquisition. At the moment, there's an awful lot of jobs that are available and not enough people to fill those. So it's very much a candidate's marketplace at the moment. It's hard sometimes to attract top talent, and organisations are trying all different things to try and appeal to them. Some of them around company benefits, and some of those is actually around the technology that they're providing. And the Surface certainly seems to be landing well in some aspects of the commercial sector. Organisations like to promote these, employees like to use the actual devices, and most importantly, they enable and drive high-level collaboration as well. Just a quick, this is my slide on the actual equipment itself. For those that aren't familiar with the Surface range, Microsoft have now been in this space for 10 years, and they categorise their products as follows. So they've got the tablets at the front, the Go, the Pro, and the Pro X. So effectively, these are the ones that Microsoft were famous for back when they first launched the Surface. So the plastic keyboards that all detach, and then you have the tablet off the back of that. Behind that, the laptop Go, the laptop are both laptops that have removable screens. So that don't have removable screens. So very hard, much more durable keyboards with fixed screens. And then the Book is much more versatile. That is a laptop. It has a screen that flips right back on itself 360 degrees, and the screen also comes off as well. So very agile piece of equipment. At the back on the left, you've got the Studio. So this really is aimed at marketing departments, CAD organisations, anyone that really needs to use graphics in a quite a big way. And what's great about the Studio is not only can the screen be used as you see it there, but it also folds pretty much flat. The angle is in line with the old-fashioned drawing boards that who used to do with technical drawing on. So it's a very, very versatile piece of equipment. On the wall there's the hub, so that can be fixed to the wall, or it also comes with a stand that can be wheeled from room to room. So most organisations, take a small number of those and then they use it in multiple different meeting rooms. And then the last piece of equipment there is the Duo. So this is now in its second variation of the Duo, an incredibly powerful piece of equipment. It's the same size as a phone, the same thickness as a phone, but it is dual screen. So you can have independent applications running on each screen, and you can drag and drop applications between the screens. So if you're trying to reduce the number of devices that your people have, particularly those that are out in the field, then the Duo is a really good way of doing that. What's great about this range is it doesn't matter which piece of or which device you have, they are all manageable by the same management tool set, which Eamon and Hannah will go through in just a second. So everything is built to run the same and be managed the same way. I've just got a couple of slides on sustainability, clearly off the back of COP26. This is something that is really important to a lot of organisations at the moment. I mean, Microsoft have been carbon neutral for the last 10 years, but they're looking to be carbon negative by 2030. I have a number of slides behind each of these slides if anyone wants to spend more time on a one-to-one basis, really understanding what Microsoft's position is around environmental areas and the way that they also treat their employees as well. And this is the last slide on the sustainability checklist. If it is something that is important to you, these are some of the things that you might want to check against any other incumbent that you're looking at. So where they get their raw materials from, where they're sourced, how they're sourced, what the labour conditions are for people that are making the equipment, how they transport that. And once again, Microsoft have got some very innovative ways of transporting equipment around the world to make them have less of an impact on the environment. The packaging that they use. We also have our own value proposition around packaging. So if it's something that you wanted to reduce the amount of packaging that gets used, then we can really bring that down to the minimum viable, the product life and the recyclability. So a lot of this is that circular economy that a lot of people talk about and how Microsoft bring that to life. So like I said, I've got a whole deck that sits behind this if it's something that you're interested in. This is my last slide, which really talks around, so we've touched on the hardware, and this really is around that collaboration between the hardware and the whole team's environment. So if you are an organisation that is looking to really enable and drive flexible working, home working, or working from anywhere, then it's important that people can be heard and their presentations can be seen. And this really is, I guess, the real richness that Microsoft bring to market. So, like I said, Microsoft do things differently to other hardware partners. We are hardware agnostic, but if it's something that you needed more validity on, then we're happy to go into more detail around how they're different on the microphones that they use and the screens and that they use as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who will talk about the broader services that Microsoft have on offer and the Bytes managed workspace, or BMW, which is a wraparound of services that we have to make it easier for you to provide a great customer experience for your internal workers.
Thanks, Darren. And also, guys, if you do, oh, Darren, I get a bit of echo if you don't mind going on mute. Perfect. Yeah, so also as well, there's any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat window and we'll answer them as the session's going, and also have a Q&A session at the end. So, but yeah, so for today's session, there are a number of different kind of Microsoft technologies that we discussed today. Some of the key technology components have been displayed on the screen. So we've got Azure Active Directory, which is the cloud-based identity and access management service, Windows 10, the operating system, Autopilot, which is the deployment methodology, Intune, which is actually used to manage the devices, and Enterprise Mobility and Security, also known as EMS, which is a comprehensive suite of security tools. So they'll all be discussed in further detail. But also today, we'll be discussing the kind of, as Darren's mentioned, the Bytes managed workspace, also known as the BMW offering. I have to admit, despite the logo, we won't be offering any promo codes or kind of great deals to purchase a nice new car. But actually, we're talking about the Bytes device managed service. It's designed to support the end-to-end life cycle of a device. We'll also be discussing the key problems it solves and the different support options you have available. But I'm actually going to hand to Eamon now to run through the overview of the Microsoft endpoint management technology. So over to you, Eamon.
Thanks, Hannah. Appreciate that. I'm gutted to hear no free BMWs have been handed out today. But my session this morning is really looking at the endpoint management tooling, as Darren alluded to a little bit earlier. And specifically, we're going to spend some time looking at Microsoft Endpoint Manager. It is a fairly monstrous product, and I think what we want to try and do in the next 25 minutes or so is give an overview of some of the key things. So lots in here. Any particular questions as we go, please drop them in the chat window, and Hannah and the team will kind of maybe give me notice that those questions are there. And as Hannah said, there's also a Q&A at the end as well. I think when we look at Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and particularly the last couple of years, we're going to dig into some trends about what we're seeing in the marketplace, and some of the studies that are kind of going on out there, just to give some background. Obviously, the last 18 months have been pretty challenging, so it has pushed a trend towards modern management, particularly over the last kind of 2 years. But it's nothing new. Modern management has been on the agenda for some time. But some of the drivers behind modern management, a report by Flexera has shown that a massive increase in cloud adoption, particularly in the last 2 years, and personal devices are now everywhere. So the embracing of BYOD or CYOD, all the different variations of kind of personally managed devices, is very much part of our ecosystem now. So as a service, we need to understand how we manage them securely alongside the corporate stuff. So most of us are having to deal with a hybrid of corporate and personal devices in some shape or form. And we'll come back to kind of what we mean by that a little bit later. I think device management, for me, one of the key standout things when we're in conversations with customers is, how do we keep devices up to date and secure? It's probably one of the kind of perennial challenges that people have. And if anything, that's a more challenging situation now when we look at the different ways we can do feature updates and quality updates. Sometimes you can have multiple updates a month, and there is a lot of hesitancy around how you do that successfully without interrupting the user. So part of the BMW service is really about managing that process in a safe, secure way, so the devices are always up to date. And we'll come back to that as a part of the Microsoft Endpoint Manager later. We've talked about the kind of BYOD piece, but another kind of fairly major statistic came from a Tech Republic article a couple of months ago, is the use of maybe not so much a BYOD device, but the application sitting on a phone, accessing a corporate resource. So if it's an email app and so on. So the increase in apps that we're allowing people to use, and we've seen this in every single sector in the last 2 years, that they need to, people on both on the road or working from home, being able to connect from their own device to specific applications. A very, very significant increase in this. And again, through the BMW service that Hannah was talking about, we use the Intune elements, we use the conditional access elements, and we use the what's referred to as the MCAS elements to ensure that we're providing a sensible strategy of managing that device, even on that application, even on a personal device. And finally, it's a huge topic in its own right, but there's been a monstrous increase in security breaches, lots of different statistics. This one relates to the number of kind of globally exposed records in 2020, and it's pretty significant. I think really I could summarize by saying security is intrinsic to the service, to the device management strategy that we deploy through BMW, and particularly we look at data and identity and how we can protect that on the device to making sure that it's really a seamless part of the BMW service. I think the second topic that we just wanted to highlight is when we look at device management, there's kind of the older management, classic management, and cloud management. And there is a little bit of tension between these two models that we're seeing when we're out doing new deployments. And that's understandable. A lot of organizations have spent a lot of time and money securing a build, securing a gold image, and locking it down. So, moving to a more flexible cloud model is quite alien in some cases, quite different in some cases. I think if we get nothing else across on this session over the next kind of half hour or so, is that it doesn't have to be one or other. And I think the beauty of Endpoint Manager is putting the elements of your classic management and elements of modern management into one management portfolio and getting the best of both worlds while you potentially transition to full cloud management over a number of years. This does not have to be a 3 months and it's all done type thing. It could be a kind of a full-time transition or a transition over a longer period of time. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go into the remaining slides. I think one of the key things for us today is Microsoft Endpoint Manager has been around with us now for a few years. It's a collection of technologies. Hannah's already alluded to some of them: Win 10, Autopilot, Azure AD, Intune, and so on. But I think one thing that is quite important is conceptually, it's nothing new. This is taking existing products in Microsoft Intune and System Center Configuration Manager and putting them into one cohesive management tool. So it's a combination of tools. There are some licensing implications around the BMW service and the minimum elements that we recommend to give an end-to-end management suite. But Hannah will come back to that in a little while. For us, when we look at a device, and this is really how we're going to focus, certainly the remainder of my section, when we look at a device, we look at it very much like as a life cycle. It's taking it from the device first arrives or is re-provisioned in an organization, taking it through its actual day-to-day of managing and running it and securing it, making sure it's up to date and giving a really good experience to the end user. We want to avoid situations where we hear people saying, I prefer using my own laptop at home because it's quicker and more efficient, I can do more things. The devices we provide corporately need to be managed and secure and efficient. So we'll talk about the management and security. And then finally, the retiring, bringing the device out of the life cycle or re-provisioning it back in when a new joiner. So we'll talk about kind of each of those three elements, and we'll do a section on each of those three. So we'll start off on the first one, which is ultimately the provisioning of the device and kind of what happens around the provisioning of the device. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Sorry, bear with me a sec. Let me start that again. Apologies. There we go. That's my fat fingers. Okay, so the first part is the provisioning of the device and kind of some of the key elements of the device. For us, the BMW service and provisioning in general really is a collection of technologies coming together in one nice set of tools. So first and foremost, the first key part of the BMW service is the use of Autopilot and Autopilot deployment. So one of the key things we do when we work with a customer and a customer joins the BMW service is we take their deployment strategy and we convert it into an Intune Autopilot based deployment. And that's where new or recycled devices are provisioned directly from the manufacturer or through some kind of white gloving service. User devices become Autopilot enrolled, and that's kind of step one. Step two is then using Intune to deploy and manage the whole device lifecycle. So both deployment of applications to start with, and then the ongoing deployment of policies, patches, and all of those kind of key things. This is one of the key things that we do recommend, the use of Azure Active Directory P1, and that's purely to allow us to have an efficient enrollment process. You don't 100% need that, but it's something that makes the process kind of a seamless and end-to-end piece. And then one of the other key components is as part of the BMW service is not so much the day-to-day management, but also the day-to-day securing. So based on individual user licensing, we have a set of predefined policies and packages to turn on some of the key security features, be that particularly around Defender for Endpoint, but any of the other advanced threat analytics products, they will be get enabled so that we're getting good quality analytics coming from the device, both reactively and proactively managing the security of that device. So they're kind of some of the key components. But if we stand back and we look at fundamentally how the service works and how Autopilot and some of these things come together as kind of one unit. Firstly, the BMW admin really manages the full joiners, movers, levers process. So Autopilot is configured on the device and synchronized so that we have full enrollment into Azure AD and Intune. That configuration piece is using the fundamental Autopilot service. But we here at Core have something that we've worked with Bytes on, and this is something we call our Autopilot SmartPackage. And this is something we're very proud of. It's something we've been working on for a number of years. And this is an enhancement to make sure that the Autopilot process is timely. If you look on the forums, you'll see some feedback that Autopilot, whilst a very, very good and new technology from Microsoft, the end user experience can be sometimes slightly delayed, that when the user boots the device, it's a slightly longer boot period and a slightly longer build period for a new device than you would like. So our SmartPackage has a number of new features built into it. One of them is we refer to as the Microsoft Endpoint Manager onboarding utility, and that's a utility that streamlines the both the enrollment process of that device into your environment and then the predefining of certain applications. And ultimately, what we're establishing is when the device hits the user, the build period is much, much quicker. We have a whole set of other kind of built-in tools which are around streamlining the build process. The second piece then really is the provisioning of the device itself. And working side by side with Bytes on this, we have a number of options of how a device goes from the procurement portal itself, so being purchased, and then working its way to whether it goes directly to an end user or whether it goes through some form of white glove where it's pre-built and then sent to the user. So there are a whole set of options that are fundamentally part of BMW about a device getting to user in a timely fashion, and that the build itself is nice and simple and timely. And the last piece, depending on scale and size, I think is quite important, is when we enroll the device and get the device working, we're also doing things like permissioning for the user, license management for the user, asset management. So all of the housekeeping that needs to happen relating both to the device and the user is an automatic process. And particularly when we look at users leaving or changing roles, that we manage the permissioning and security as well behind the scenes, and licensing. So if people leave, reallocation of licenses and management of cost and cost efficiency is a key part of the end-to-end cycle. I think just from a user perspective, what does Autopilot look like? So this is a very simple illustration of the Autopilot process. And my personal analogy on this is it's a little bit like when a new iPhone arrives, whether it's Christmas morning or whenever you manage to get your new iPhone or whatever device you're currently into. That experience of unboxing and going through a pretty simple setup is exactly what Autopilot is trying to achieve for an end user. We ship them a new device, they unbox the device, they plug into the device, and then they run through a very simple wizard-based install. So firstly, they select a region, select a keyboard layout, connect the device to the network. There are some things we need to do around VPNing and how we manage the VPN connection, but that's part of the wider config. The user logs on, and once we've done the log on, we've done the key connect. The Autopilot Intune stuff now is kicking off, and in particular Core's SmartPackage, depending on what we've preloaded, devices have been both policy settings, what would have been historically GPO settings. These are all being applied to the device. We are using the original manufacturer's build so that we're not having to do any wiping and builds, but we are applying the policies, whether it's NCSC policies, whatever policies. So we're hardening the device, but sticking to the solid build from the manufacturer. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve with this, is the best of both worlds. Use of pins, Windows Hello, all of those things then are finally the last few bits of the service, and then the device is up and running. So that at its simplest is the process that an end user would see and go through. That's really the technology sits behind this, and BMW is about making that as simple as possible, so that we get away from gold images and we go away from more traditional and make it much easier to manage and run and look after. Part two of the cycle really is then a look at how we manage and secure the devices. So now that the user is up and running, what do we do in terms of managing and securing the devices? And there are lots of things we can do, but in the next section, I'm going to under management and security, I'm going to focus on two. I'm going to focus on unified management. What are the key things we can do to manage a device? And then I'm going to change tact and look a little bit at some of the things we can do to secure a device. So topic number one, this is an interesting topic because we could put probably 20 or 30 different things. And for today's session, really, we're going to focus on what we think are the four key unified management principles. So some of the things that if you're new to Microsoft Endpoint Manager or looking at strategically changing to Endpoint Manager, some of the things that really quite quickly out of the box you can bring to your environment to increase your management capabilities and increase overall efficiency of the devices. So we'll do a slide on each one of these and we'll talk in more detail. So I won't run through this slide, but I will jump onto the first topic, which is extending the benefits of cloud management. I think for me, this is probably the most important slide in that it isn't an all or nothing. If we are going to move to cloud management, there is a journey that we can go through that we can align to existing management strategies and get to a nice state maybe in 3-6 months time. So what are the steps? So step one, as an absolute minimum, if you're using System Center in-house, all your devices are currently, from an identity perspective, domain joined. The minimum that we recommend doing is doing what's referred to as a tenant attach. And that really is, without your devices being enrolled in Intune or cloud managed in any shape or form, we're getting some of the benefit of a single web-based console, the Microsoft Endpoint Manager console, to get a very, very simple, very useful but simple way of seeing all our devices and being able to do some of the management. So things like real-time client information, being able to run some device scripts. So yes, you're still using fundamentally your management on-prem, but what you are now getting is one cloud-based console to see everything. So it's step one. It's a logical step, and if you're looking at a transition, it's really for the first key step. Step 2 is where we move to co-management, and that's where we do have the devices enrolled. We basically can use the best of both worlds. We can use System Center locally for certain things, like maybe deploying applications, and we can use Intune, because the devices are now Intune enrolled, to do policy updates or patch updates. So we get to see both working side by side. There is no rule as to what you should divide between the two, but what it is a very good preparatory stage for you to go to full cloud management. And for the vast majority of our current customers, a lot are sitting in that co-managed world where they're getting the best of both worlds as they transition. The easiest way, by the way, to go into full kind of cloud management, certainly when we look at Autopilot, is any new devices to go straight to an Intune managed world, and where they're fully cloud managed, fully Azure AD connected, and then we get the benefits of single sign-on and a number of other key benefits. So having a hybrid of devices that are fully cloud managed, co-managed, and even tenant attached is fully applicable, and will be probably a key strategy that we see to customers. So summary of this slide is there is a transitional plan to get to fully cloud managed, and working that out and establishing that is kind of key one as part of an architecture design. The second topic we want to look at really is about one of the key things that became a challenge, I suppose, in the last 12 to 18 months as well, is it's been a challenge full stop, but a challenge that was even more important to get on top of, and that's when we look at providing hybrid continuity. One of the key things we look at is how do we keep devices patched, and that's seamless device update. So first and foremost, Endpoint Manager supports two kind of key ways of doing this. Firstly, we have Intelligent Edge. So for devices that are still domain joined, Intune and Endpoint Manager will allow us do Intelligent Edge deployments, and for cloud joined devices, so fully cloud managed, we have Intelligent Edge. So both of those technologies that are built into Endpoint Manager allow us to do feature updates and quality updates, which allow us to structure those, put some policies around those, and ultimately put them into deployment rings. And that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier about SmartPackage. So one of the extensions of our SmartPackage is a utility we've just actually launched in the last month, and we call it our Microsoft Endpoint Ring Promotion Utility. So as you move patches and policy updates between deployment rings, and these are really just a deployment ring at its simplest as a way of de-risking your updates, be they patches or policies. So you try them on test devices, you then move them to maybe the IT devices, and then you move them to end user devices. So that management and structure of moving those policy updates, we have a utility which sits on top of Endpoint Manager, and that's called our Ring Promotion Utility. And ultimately, kind of to see the concept of this in operation, if I go into Endpoint Manager itself, have a quick look at the Windows 10 update rings that are available. There's a number that we could have configured. In this test example, we have one policy set up, and it's given me some, I think for me, one of the most important things that when you do tenant attach and you start using Endpoint Manager is the analytics and the capabilities and the reporting that you now have about what's going on in your estate. Here's a good example of devices that have yet to be deployed, have yet to have a deployment ring implemented on them, so we get some analytics on this. But if I look at the properties of this particular deployment ring, I get to see some of the key configurations that we have as an organization. So we can do things like pause the updates, give the users the options to restart. All those kind of key things are built into a specific ring, and they're configurable based on who's part of that ring. So a lot of configuration capability built into this. The next section for me is a very simple one, but an important one that we focus in on as part of BMW, and that's the control of users. User control, if we look at a help desk and we look at what is probably some of the more common things that we see, password reset, password management is always one of the big topics. It's expensive, it's costly, and it's risky. User-based password resets is open to social engineering and all of the threats that come with that. So a couple of key strategies out of the box that BMW deploys. First and foremost, the use of self-service password reset, or SSPR. Ultimately, if it's licensable, we have set policy just to turn it on, enable it, and provide the service behind the scenes to run that. But one of the things we want to highlight today is actually a utility that's available in Azure AD that we feel is just very underused. It may not apply to your organization, but as an organization that have frontline workers, organizations that have large distributed workforces, sometimes the most appropriate people to manage teams are actually their line managers or people who are allocated to understand who's in that team. Particularly, we've got a transient team that are coming in and out quite regularly. So one of the features Microsoft have is the My Staff service that effectively allows you to promote a distributed ability to have people creating passwords and managing users within your environment. So one service that we just recommend allows you to do remote administration and distribute some of the workload, and ultimately provide additional layer of security as a result. So you've less hacking going on, you've less password issues as part of using it. Another very key topic for us, topic number 3, really it's actually topic number 4, sorry, under the unified management piece. And this has really come to the fore in the last 12 to 18 months, is embracing virtual devices, and where virtual and physical kind of come together. And for us, the real exciting piece really in the last kind of 6 months or so was the introduction of Windows 365. Effectively, what Microsoft have done, and they would claim it's new, but I think that's a bit of a broad claim, but there's effectively a device category now between the fully virtual device and the physical device. This is a device on demand, a Windows 365 device. And as part of the BMW service, really what our service is around is deciding what's the best way to deploy and manage your estate. Is it through physical? Is it through using Azure Virtual Desktop, which is up until recently kind of the primary way we would have done this, or is it through Windows 365? And part of the service really is understanding, which you should use and when. For example, what Windows 365 gives us is a really, really positive experience, particularly from the feedback that we've been working with so far, of that ability to move between different device types as a user and have a stop-start experience where you pick up where you left off if you move from your iPad to your laptop to your desktop as you move around. So users who want that consistency of experience, Win 365 is absolutely fantastic in terms of how it achieves that. It also achieves a simple cost basis that you know what your costs are. However, as you start to scale up into higher processing, the need to use virtualized applications, you're shifting a little bit away more into Azure Virtual Desktop. But I think really important piece for this slide is it's not all or nothing. We have a couple of customers that we're working with right now that have a mixture of Win 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, and obviously the physical devices that they're managing as well. So the service manages and supports all of those 3 variations using Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Azure Manager as well, where that's needed. So that was the management piece. The next section we're going to focus on is really the 4 key considerations when protecting and securing devices, and some of the things that we highly recommend. This topic, we actually do a full hour on this one slide alone, so I'm going to give it its kind of 20-second elevator pitch. But for us, as part of the BMW service and as part of the appropriate licensing from a Microsoft point of view, the introduction of the use of conditional access to support Microsoft's support of Zero Trust itself. So the ability to have a new look at how we manage devices. So this always never trust and always verify approach to security. And being able to manage conditionally how we protect users. So MFA, or multi-factor authentication, is something that obviously is very, very important. It's one of the most, it's one of the highest on Microsoft's list of things that they recommend you turn on. However, if we use MFA on a constant basis and have users being MFA'd in the morning 5 times a day, it's an experience that we've taken security to a point where it's now interrupting the business flow. So conditional access, when configured through Endpoint Manager into our BMW service, is tailored that it's conditional and it's contextual to the user. So where we have more risk, where we work out the users are moving, we don't understand or don't recognize their different patterns, we can turn on conditional access as needed, as opposed to it being turned on all the time. So there's a huge layer of granularity that we have in terms of how we control multi-factor authentication, password resets, all of the kind of key things that we can do. So conditional access is a huge topic. It's one that we configure by default as part of the BMW service. I'm having a nightmare of these slides this morning, so bear with me 1 sec. Let me jump back to that slide. There we are. I'm my fingers are definitely very fat this morning. So the second thing we want to touch on is device compliance. And to me, this is the kind of jewel in the crown of understanding how we use things like conditional access and device compliance. We have to let users use, or potentially we have to let users use their own devices. That's kind of one of the key things we've been talking about for the session so far. But we can mitigate the fact that they may be using a jailbroken iPhone or whatever. So we don't really understand the hygiene of the device. So in this really quick example here, what we're talking about is, let's try and establish the device compliance. And where we're happy with device compliance, we may let the device do whatever we believe it should do. Where we're not happy with the device compliance, we can then start to use the conditional access to say, well, we'll allow you come in and use the finance system, but before you do that, we'll ask you to accept the terms and conditions update, we'll ask you to reset your password, or we'll ask you to do an MFA. So we can be conditional on the device state. One final comment on this particular topic is, with the SmartPackage that I've been mentioning a few times this morning, we have something that we refer to as the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Compliance Analysis Suite, and that effectively produces a report that gives you a full hygiene of every single device that's in your environment, and extends what Endpoint Manager does to give you a really clear automated view of device reporting and device state. And that's particularly important as people extend the number of devices they're allowing into their environment. So it's one of the things that we've enhanced what Endpoint Manager does, just to give that view. The next piece that we include in terms of is the configuration implementation of the full Defender for Endpoint. Again, that's license dependent. But if you have it in your environment, that is enabled as part of the service, and that will, for example, look at attack surface reduction policies, and automatic investigation and remediation policies. So whether you're using a SOC service or not, we can configure the environment so that it's alerting and proactive in terms of understanding threats on the device, and using that as kind of one cohesive security management suite. Sorry, just as a quick look, how do we achieve that, by the way? Sorry, just as a quick update, we use security baselines. So there's a number of out-of-the-box baselines that we have. They align to NCSE, to Cyber Essentials Plus, to some of the US standards. They all can be dropped in straight out of the box, and they are standard configs. Some customers look at more complicated configs, but we believe they're configs that will let people get up and running with a base set of security baselines to operate Endpoint Manager, for the security for Endpoint Manager. The last section just on management and security is really just around proactivity, and we just want to highlight one or two really key points on this. Firstly, our firm belief here is that if we have users calling us up, we're a little bit behind the curve. So one of the key features built into Endpoint Manager is the ability to create device remediation capabilities. So that's one of the key things that we configure, and we'll show a quick example in the next couple of slides. So my last section, a couple of quick minutes before I hand back to Hannah, is around the end of life. What are the kind of key things we can do with end of life devices? So first and foremost, we have a whole set of things we can do in terms of auditing, managing stolen devices, lost devices, retiring devices. But jumping into the kind of nuts and bolts for me, Microsoft provide a lot of information around analytics. We have productivity score, which is around users' end-to-end productivity. But the piece that I think is really important here is the endpoint analytics piece. It's really simple to look at the kind of advice and guidance that out of the box we get when we use endpoint analytics as part of an endpoint management implementation. And just to give some kind of quick overview of the kind of things that we get out of the box once we've configured Endpoint Manager. If we look at reports and we look specifically at endpoint analytics, we immediately get a snapshot of where our devices sit in terms of a baseline that we set for the organization and a score that we have. And as you see on the right hand side, we have an immediate set of recommendations. And if we look at more granularly where the recommendations are coming from, one of the key things that we spot with users is how do we get an efficient, secure and fast running device? So things like start performance, we've got kind of the core boot, the sign in, the group policies. We get really strong analytics around which elements of those are slowing down the boot process. So our ability to fine tune that process is really important. We also, something I referred to earlier, the proactive remediations. We get to deploy, run and manage proactive remediations from here. And then finally, there's a set of recommendations on what it recommends you should be doing on the device. So in all of these examples that I've been showing, we're actually ahead of the baseline, but doesn't mean that we're also getting some key recommendations. And very simple example on screen here, we have the recommendation to enroll in Azure AD to allow us to do things like single sign-on, improve the user experience, but also improve the security posture. So they're kind of simple examples of some of the key things we can do in terms of the device lifecycle. I think I'm going to hand off to Anna, who's going to extend that a little bit further and just show kind of what the next steps would be.
Thank you, Eamon. Apologies, sorry. Good. Me and you not having good with our tech today, are we? So yeah, as Eamon mentioned, we're going to run through the kind of BMW service in kind of slightly more detail. But I think the word kind of life cycle has been mentioned quite a lot today. But when it considering actually the life cycle of a device and also a user, BMW is broken down into 4 service areas, following kind of the Microsoft methodology. So step one even, being the setup and acquisition. So this can consist of a device refresh if that's needed, configuring the existing estate to the new and improved build. We're working with the JML process, enrolling devices into Azure Active Directory and Intune, and setting up any third-party infrastructure which might be required for the device. Kind of step 2 and step 3, they're kind of similar but slightly different. So step 2 is what we call proactive support. So this element of support kind of consists of the management, the patching, the upgrading, the deployment of the operating system, any applications, any security policies. Whereas kind of step 3 is the reactive support. So this focuses more on the end user incidents and tickets. So this can range from the dreaded blue screen of death to kind of permission changes to help users gain access to applications, whether it be Teams or OneDrive, or kind of the old classic of kind of password resets if self-service password hasn't been set up yet. But lastly, not leastly, kind of to echo Eamon's last phase, is step 4, which is the decommissioning, which is also the final layer, but also very, very important, as Eamon's mentioned. This we can use to either recycle the device back into the service or can actually have it for kind of in stock for kind of users that are coming down the line later on in your own organization. But so there are different support levels that are kind of joined to BMW. Not all customers will require a fully first or third line managed service. So the BMW service is charged on a per user per month basis. So depending on the level of support that you actually go for, the pricing's tiered. So if you have an existing kind of in-house team already, the second and third line option can actually help this internal team by providing additional resources when resourcing's tight. And also the Microsoft technologies, as we all know, they like to change the name quite a lot, but also it's actually ever evolving. So if teams are quite busy looking at kind of wider than the Microsoft and device estate, you don't have someone that's able to focus on all the changes coming down the line. So you can leverage the BMW team to actually have these subject matter experts to push it back into your environment. On the other side of the coin, though, some customers have a smaller IT team. And you'd rather have this team focusing on the kind of business critical industry specific applications. So a fully first or third line service might actually suit you better. But I know a lot of questionings around kind of why should I consider outsourcing? Well, BMW is designed to kind of solve 5 key business problems. So firstly, to improve the user satisfaction. So this includes regular surveying, comparison to NPS scores. Users are happier when the device and the support they're actually receiving is much more efficient. So this links really nicely to the productivity side of things, where workforces with higher quality devices are more productive as applications load faster and what can be achieved in a day increases, which is great. But of course, as Eamon touched upon in kind of his overview, wouldn't be able to function without focusing on the kind of security team's requirements. So the devices are built to the standard of NCSC guidelines, and we do take into consideration any ISO 27001 or Cyber Essential requirements that an organization might have. But for many of you on the call today, I'm sure that you have device estates range in makes, models, different operating system levels. So BMW does actually standardize the device. So this is great, not just for kind of the BMW team supporting, but also your internal IT team. The management becomes so much more efficient and easier. And the last area, and is normally a big hit for kind of the CFOs and the IT directors, but there is a predictable billing model. So as it is a per user per month cost, you're able to forecast what the IT spend will be for the year. The service is charged monthly, so it does allow you to kind of remove and have users join. So it'll be the Christmas period, maybe you have some users that join, or if it's kind of the summer period, you might have a lull. This means that you can have a more reflective kind of billing model, which is great. You're actually only being paid for what you only get charged for what you're consuming. But I'm going to delve into some more of the benefits of BMW. Some of them we've already chatted about. But the BMW service is really designed to be flexible. So what do I mean by this? Well, customers, you have a lot of choices, whether it's the device, pick the level of support that's most appropriate for you, whether the MDM tooling is kind of cloud-based, is it on-premise, is it co-management, the costing, as we've talked about, flexes up and down. But I also like to talk about the benefits of having a unified supplier. So some of you might actually be new to Bytes today, and others already have an existing relationship. Having a multi-vendor environment, should I say, can cause some problems with who actually owns the overall responsibility when things go wrong. But Bytes have the ability to help with your licensing, with Microsoft and non-Microsoft services, but most importantly with BMW. So they're able to look after the actual core of the business, which is the user's device. So my last slide today on the BMW kind of service is just to make you aware of the licensing criteria. So the service is suitable for those on the Microsoft Business Premium, the Microsoft 365 E3, the Microsoft 365 E5 SKUs. The higher the SKU you're on, then the more we can roll out to the devices. But if you're actually considering what's the minimum criteria, that includes Windows 10 Pro, Azure Active Directory P1, and Intune. So your account manager at Bytes can help work with you to make sure that you've got the most cost-effective way to actually license your workforce. So I'm just going to hand to Darren at this point.
Thanks, Hannah. So there's been some really good content so far. So one of the best ways to get access to some of this technology and the services is via a much more efficient way of paying for the hardware particularly. So there's some very innovative commercial models that we can extend to you. Some are a straightforward finance agreement, which stretches the payment over 3 years. But what we are really good at the moment is taking the residual value into consideration when we're looking at some of these commercial models. So as one example, if a device typically costs £1,000 up front, after 3 years, the Surface does have quite a good retention level and should retain about 20% of its value. So the RV is about £200. What we do then is take the £200 of the expected RV off of the £1,000 up front to leave £800, and then we apply the finance charge. So it just means that over the passage of 3 years, you end up paying less than the equipment cost if you're going to capital purchase that. And then at the end of 3 years, you have options. You can either hand the equipment back, you can upgrade it to the next version, or you can buy it at fair market value, which will be around about that 20% mark. So the hardware itself, you can get some really good cash advantages by extending the payment. We also have a carbon net zero operating model as well. So over the 3 year period, we will offset all the carbon associated with that equipment and that purchase. So if you are looking at certain targets around the environment, then we can help there. And we also offer a fully fledged subscription service. So after you've had the device for typically 12 months, you can hand that equipment back any time that you like. So we try to have a number of different models to actually suit your preferred way of buying. We can then add on these services that Hannah said. So for effectively a fixed cost per head, you could have the equipment and all the services that go alongside that. So it makes budgeting a lot easier, makes your whole operation a lot more agile. So we're very happy to have separate conversations with you around how you can pay for some of this equipment and the services to make it a lot more efficient.
Thank you, Darren. And yeah, there's also some workshops that Bytes can offer you. So there is actually a chance that your organisation might be eligible for a free of charge Microsoft funded workshop. There are a number of workshops that are actually in this funding group, and Endpoint Manager is one of the workshops. So if you're interested in finding out, then please do contact your account manager with your tenant ID, and they can check out which ones you're eligible for. You might actually be eligible for more than one, which is great. But unfortunately, though, if you are not eligible, Oh, now my mouse has gone weird. We do also have the option to proceed with a BMW, what we call the BMW EUD Workshop. So this can be more tailored, but it covers the key components of delving further into the Microsoft technologies, reviewing your current endpoint estate and application estate. And once again, if this is of interest, your account manager can set up a call. We can run through the agenda, the structure and the pricing. Yeah, so thanks everyone. I'll hand back to Darren to host the Q&A session.
Great stuff. Thanks, everyone. Is there anyone that's got any specific questions that we can take the last 5 minutes to answer? No? Okay. Well, thanks for taking the time to join the session. We do have this recorded, like I said, so if you are keen on passing this around to some of your colleagues, then we'll send you the link after this. But thanks for your time, and thanks again to Hannah and Eamon and to Catherine, and we will see you again soon.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Is all. Thank you.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. Thank you.